This flawless victory by Hans Niemann has been pointed at as being a suspicious game when Yosha looked at this using the gambit-man analysis. It came out at 100% engine game correlation when they did their analysis, and Fabi, when he reviewed this one, said either Hans is a genius or something fishy is going on. So lots of rumours swirling. It was played in the Reykjavik Open in Iceland, April 22 this year. Hans actually finished 4th in this tournament. Prague won the tournament, so if he did cheat the whole tournament, he didn't exactly do a very good job to not even come in the top 3. So let's have a look at this one. Hans had white and he kicks off here with e4. His opponent's a GM, Gretarsson, goes for the Sicilian defence. Knight f6, pawn e6 played, tons of different moves for black of course, but here black goes for this Taimanov setup. Knight recaptures, knight c6 now played, knight c3, and here black has a choice of moves. Queen c7 is the main line. If you go knight f6 immediately, then it gives white these options to take here, pawn recaptures, e5. Now there's a ton of games from here, knight e4 is now the top move, different way to play. But the main move by the black players here is queen to c7, so it covers these dark squares, it stops the pawn coming to e5. Bishop e2 now played, and this signals an intent to castle kingside. If white starts with bishop e3, that signals the intent to castle queenside. Now we had a6, and now here Hans plays an unusual move. Most commonly here you see the king castling, then later on we get some knight takes on c6 stuff very often, but not so soon as this, because after pawn recaptures, this is considered usually okay for black. They get a quick d5, they're stabilising. But this is the key follow-up manoeuvre. So queen d3, pawn d5, and then the queen transfers to g3 here. And you're forcing an endgame, because you can't develop the bishop, you lose the pawn here. If you move the queen away from this diagonal, say you come here, well now white just stands really well, pressuring your whole position, and e5 is bad, you're just leading to a bad pawn structure, losing a pawn even. So you don't want to be doing those. Queen takes top move, pawn recaptures, the knight now comes to f6, pressuring this pawn, and Hans has done his homework, he goes pawn to g4 here. And now it looks like you can just win a pawn. Say for example you take with the knight. Well then after knight recaptures, pawn recaptures, the key thing about this whole variation, this is a sample line, these are the top engine moves, well you're going to be winning back this pawn or maybe even this pawn or this pawn later down the line. White has these plans to double on the h-file and then it's really hard to defend this pawn once this one comes to g5, plus these are weak, this one could be weak, so you're recouping the pawn at some point and then with advantage. So that's why the pawn on e4 isn't taken in this position. Instead, bishop b4 is played, pressuring the knight and now truly threatening to win this pawn. So bishop d2 defends against those threats in a tactical manner. Again, if you try and win the pawn, let's say you take it like this time, well the knight recaptures. This is a common tactic because if bishop takes here, the knight takes back. And if you take the knight first, well, we win this bishop. So you see this a lot, very common tactic. So instead black just castles. One more thing to point out, if you go d4, well there's different decent moves for white, but e5 is a classic one played by Sergei Karyakin in this exact position. You kick the knight back here because if black takes, you take back with the pawn, you're still hitting two pieces, you're doing well. So the knight drops back here, this is the main way to play, and then you can find this home on e4. These ones come off. Yes, you lose a pawn, but then you're going to win the pawn back with knight b3. There's no c5 or you take there. So a deep line there, but this is the kind of opening prep that Hans has done here. So none of the black moves are that decent here. Taking the pawn, going d4. So instead simply castles was played, good move. And now we had this pawn kicking onto e5, kicks the knight, pawn f4 supports it, and black now goes f6. Good move, undermining that chain. There's no good way to defend this pawn, so it captures on f6. The knight now hops back in, and g5 kicks on. Once again forces the knight to backpedal, and now castles queenside. So there's some really nice attacking ideas now for Hans, doubling on the h-file, pressuring this pawn, bishop d3 if the time is right, and so this is why black now strikes in the centre. so pawn e5 was played. And now here Hans plays an excellent move. He lifts the rook up the board to h4, covering this pawn, preparing to double in some lines, and there's some crazy tactical stuff going on here. So for example, if you now kick on with pawn to e4, this is once again a tactical mistake because you're walking into this same issue with that unprotected bishop on b4. And if instead in this position here, you take this pawn on f4, well this is also really risky because now the bishop can come to d3, attacking this pawn. If g6 to defend looks very logical, then white doubles on the h-file. Now black can still keep playing with knight to e5, but if you play the natural rook f7 to cover that h-pawn, then we crash through here. Because if pawn recaptures, you're getting mated. This is really unfortunate for the black king. So there's a lot of attacking ideas going on here. So instead of taking on f4, pushing e4, here we had this retreating move of bishop to e7, and now there is a threat to take here, because then the bishop could be taking on g5 at the right moment. There's some tactics going on down towards the king, all of this sort of stuff. So here we had bishop to d3, and again it's just great calculation from Hans. You hit that pawn, and if white goes e4, which wasn't played, again we're sacking a piece. Pawn recaptures and bishop c4 check, and this attack is just absolutely brutal. The best move is king to h8, then we double the rooks once again, pawn h6 played, and then the bishop comes to c3. These are just slicing down towards the king, as we can see, and there's a threat to actually take now, deliver checkmate. The pawn is pinned, so you'd have to cover the diagonal, giving up a piece. White doesn't even have to take. This is the top line, and white's just hugely for choice here. g4, g5 coming, the whole position's crushing. So there's a lot of tactics going on here, but a really exceptional attack if you actually push on with e4. So h6 played instead. Now this rook drops back to h2. You'd love to take that pawn, but then your rook is on prise, and this whole rook h4, rook h2 maneuver, this is what some people are pointing to as suspicious. Either way, it's a beautiful kind of rook swing back and forth like a pendulum, and once again, e4 is not working tactically, but this is fascinating. This time it's because not of bishop c4 check. This time it's not good because the king can come to h7 instead of h8, and this gives a vital tempo. Now when you double, you've got time for knight b6, hitting the bishop, and knight d5. Very, very nuanced stuff. But so that's why in this variation, you can't actually then bring that bishop to c4 with check. Instead, you take here, and this is better for white because you're actually going to gobble enough pawns to offset the fact that you're down a piece, plus you have some attack. Very, very deep stuff. But we didn't have e4 played. Knight c5 came instead, hits this bishop, and now Hans makes this correct decision. He takes on h6 here, lets black win his bishop pair, that beautiful light squared bishop, but in the process he is winning a pawn at least. So the king recaptures. He now doubles on the h-file. Bishop to g5 played, covers that square. So now when you check, force the king up the board, well there's no second check on this square, the bishop's covered that one, and so the rook now swings to c7, and this is the key thing about the position for Hans. He's got this initiative now against the black king, plus these pieces here are just woefully undeveloped. So we had bishop e6 now played. The reason you can't defend this pawn is that if you go rook to f6, then this second rook slams down, threatens to win a piece, and if you save it with bishop to b7, the trick here, by the way, is you can't take here or you lose here, but if you take here, well, this isn't so good, not the best way for white to play, still better, but the trick is doubling the rooks then on the file. You're about to win a piece, forces it back, and now one sort of maneuver I've drawn on the board here is knight e2 coming to d4, and it's just an awful position for black to play. You're so tied down, really not good. So that's why rook f6 wasn't played to defend this pawn. Instead, bishop e6 played, gives the pawn but develops pieces. So now rook f6 defends this bishop. This rook switched back to e1, attacking it. It now drops back here. This rook has to stay with the pawn, so you know it couldn't come and defend and that kind of thing. Now we had takes on f6 with check. The bishop recaptured, and now you could win this pawn, could win this pawn immediately here, but even more powerful is knight to e2, swinging around to reclaim it with check. Rook c8 played, the king came to b1, now bishop h4, hits this rook, the knight jumped in with check, king moves, rook f1 comes to that file, and so the king comes in again, looking to activate, but this is a lovely backpedaling move. You stop the king from coming in, plus the pawn covers these squares, and you now open the rook, attacking this unprotected bishop, so it nudged back to g8 here, rook f4 check, activated, kicked the king back, and now it swings across the board, another beautiful pendulum move, hits that weak a6 pawn, and black now sets a trap with bishop to h7. So don't take this pawn, don't blunder your rook. That's check, you take here, you're completely lost. This is where you have to see it through right till the end, and it's what the top guys do so well. So knight f4 check was played instead, and this actually forced resignation from the black player, for the reason being that all of these squares that are the legal moves for the black king are poisoned, because if you come to either of these, then you've got the discovery of the bishop, and say you come to this one with the rook, discovery of the rook, then you've got this discovery knight check, and if you were on one of these, you'd have the same discovery bishop check. So because you're about to go 3 pawns down here, it's really just too much. That's why the black player resigned. So truly stunning game from Hans Niemann. If you want to see another game that was covered in Yosha's analysis, a suspicious one that he played against Mishra according to this analysis, then do see this game on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.